Members of the Order of the Arrow, please welcome to the stage your National Vice Chief, John Andrew Segebarth.
Wow. You know, we have the word for a fear of spiders, arachnophobia. We have the word for a fear of small places, claustrophobia. But we don't have a word for falling onto a seemingly endlessly moving piece of stage that looks suspiciously like a treadmill. If you've been to NOAC before, the moment you start your travels home, you're probably already excited for the next one. I know I have been looking forward to this moment since long before my election. And with that has come a lot of emotions. The excitement of being here with all of you tonight. And also, it gave me time to consider the journey that I took to get here. That journey to this spot tonight has been a lot of things, but it was never what I expected. And honestly, it wasn't my first dream to be on this stage years ago. If it were up to 16-year-old John Andrew, I'd be behind the yoke of a plane, flying over the Pacific Northwest, because I wanted to be a pilot more than anything. I remember coming home one day in 5th grade, it was a Friday afternoon, the best days, and I was thinking about the social studies topic that we talked about that day. We'd gone through the Revolutionary and Civil War, and we had moved on to the age of innovation. And that day, we got to watch the video about the Wright brothers, the first manned flight in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. There they are. That video was the coolest thing I had ever seen. I love roller coasters. I loved it when my dad would drive over the hills out by the Kentucky horse farms for that dropping feeling in your stomach. And so I knew what the Wright brothers got to do that day must have been exhilarating. Fun fact, the first time I actually flew was here to Boulder, Colorado to visit some family. I can still remember that first feeling of being plastered against the back of my seat upon takeoff and craning my neck up and around to look out at the window of the buildings getting smaller and smaller. It was the best thing I'd ever felt, and I wanted to feel that feeling for the rest of my life. And that's when I decided that I was going to be a commercial airline pilot. I remember after landing, I immediately got on Google and looked up, what do I need to do to become a pilot? And Google obviously gave me a list of things. You know, you had to get all of the flight hours, you go to accredited university, and get a bunch of trainings and certifications. And so my analytical mindset kicked in, and I immediately created one of my first spreadsheets. This master checklist, timeline, planner, checklist thing that had everything I needed and mapped out my entire path to getting there. And at the center point of it all was to attend Purdue University, one of the greatest flight schools in the country. That was the focal point of it. My family knew that I wanted to fly, and so that summer I signed up for aviation camp. And these 3 days were exhilarating. The first day I got to plan and play on the flight simulator to learn about how it all worked. Then I got to actually map out a real flight plan. And then on that third day, I stepped out onto the tarmac. I could smell the jet fuel in the air, and I stepped inside the cockpit of the Cessna Skyhawk right next to my instructor. And he told me a couple of things, right? He said I could do the takeoff, that he would do the landing, and pretty quickly after that, he told me to stop touching all the buttons. It was one of the greatest feelings of my entire life, and I was in full control. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. Sharing this memory, I could go on and on, that whooshing and soaring phenomenon. The skies, the clouds, the birds, and the breeze, that was just J.A. flying, please. I knew this was going to be my career. If I followed my spreadsheet, got into my dream school, blocked out time to fly out in the schedule, it would be a natural progression for me to achieve my goal with ease. Until it wasn't. On January 13th, 2023 that all came crashing down when I was rejected from Purdue University. My dream school, my 10-year plan, that career goal that made me interesting and cool in class came crashing down in a smoking heap of metal and merit. It was my identity. I had done all the right things. I had top grades. I was top 10 in my class. I was active in scouting, an Eagle Scout, a lodge officer. I had the resume. It should have been me. That door that I was walking towards for 6 years slammed in my face as I attempted to walk through. As a senior, entering my last 2 months of high school, I all of a sudden had no plan. I didn't know what to do. I was just another one of those kids that thought that after graduation would come to itself. I felt like I had nothing. I felt like I wasn't good enough because I didn't get into my dream school. That sick feeling that everything that you had pieced together for your life fell apart with one email. That I didn't know who I was anymore if I didn't know who I wanted to be. I felt like a failure. I had failed. I told myself that I was a failure. Just like in our story tonight with Mina, that failure held me down. That ideology wore down a rut in my mind. Everything else in my life seems to start going awry, and I would notice even more vividly small details and imperfections and mistakes that would just reinforce this thought in my head. And it was hard to listen to me talk to myself like that for months. Even though I could put on a smiling face and grin like I'm winning, I was doing it with a broken heart. That mental rut, that feeling of negative self-talk. I later realized that I wasn't the only one who's ever been through that. And that's when my analytical mind kicked in. A long while later, I found a study online done by 2 professors at Northwestern in Chicago, and really smart people. What they did was they got a group of people together and split them into Group A and Group B. Everyone in Group A was given a perfect score in the first round of testing, no matter what they answered. And everyone in Group B failed. 0, nothing, no matter what they answered. And then in rounds 2, 3, 4, and 5 of testing, everything was scored fairly. They all had the same information. But what happened was those people in Group A scored better and better and better than those in Group B. It goes to show that that mental rut is a real thing, that you actually can be held down by failure. And I know that's something I'm sure many of us have experienced here tonight. That paralyzing feeling that we can't be any better, or that we are exactly what negative past outcomes have turned us into. It may not just be the result of a test, like in the study I referenced, or not getting into your dream school. But maybe you identify with some other parts of my story, like being the oldest kid on your street that still used training wheels on their bicycle, or being the kid trying to stay afloat in the middle of the parents' divorce in 4th grade. Or possibly that paralyzing feeling of shame for coming out to my mom as gay. Maybe that nightlight that you kept on for years after your friends told you that they stopped using theirs. Maybe you lost a leadership election too. Maybe your best friend moved away when you needed them the most. Whether you've experienced some of what I have or not, we all have our own cache of moments in our life where it feels like the absolute worst has finally happened, and that we'd never be able to pick up the pieces of our lives that were scattered by circumstance and happen chance. When the world I envisioned for myself as a pilot collapsed suddenly, and without warning, I couldn't help but sit with my active mind, generating a stream of consciousness that pointed out past and future imperfections and failures. That mental rut formed, and I was ashamed because for years I had told my friends and family that I wanted to be a pilot. I was going to be a pilot. And I had just been shown proof that I wasn't good enough for my own dreams. Picking up those pieces was hard. So hard. Without knowing what my next new step was going to be, I just knew I needed to take one. Like how we learned in the orienteering merit badge. You pick a point in the distance, and you take one step towards your bearing. And so later that week, I emailed the University of Kentucky and accepted my place the fall of 2023. My major, political science, economics, and public policy. These were passions that I had developed over the past few years because, well, I didn't use them because I thought that I was going to be a pilot, and I had set them aside. What took a little longer was accepting that decision for myself and letting go of the dream that I had held on to for most of my life. And eventually, what was a point of paralyzing shame became something that I was grateful for. Going to UK introduced me to some of my now very close friends. I got to study under some brilliant professors, and I was encouraged to transfer to the University of Pennsylvania, where I'm excited to attend next fall. None of this I could have possibly imagined the day that I got rejected from my dream school. The life that could still be great, even if it wasn't the one that I had been planning on for so many years. Escaping that mental rut of seeing failure in every corner was one of the biggest challenges I've ever faced. The world was simpler and straightforward if I could just assume that I had gotten everything wrong. I could easily believe that because I got rejected, I couldn't be reliable enough to come up with some other dreams or even map out a path to get there. I would use my imagination to catastrophize what would happen next. But that's no way to live. Climbing out of that swirling current of thought required me to do three of the hardest things: to trust myself, to love myself, and to take that next step. First, to trust myself. Too often, when we face failure, we are crippled by what failure will make others think of us. We judge ourselves by other people's standards and feel at the mercy of everyone around us. And in succumbing to those voices, we drown out the one that matters most: our own. Following my rejection from Purdue, I decided to trust myself, to find a new mountain to climb, to trust that going to UK was doing something right, to trust that I still had an opportunity to orient myself to something better. So my first piece of advice to you, when you feel like you've had failure, even when it feels like everyone around you believes in you the least, trust yourself the most. Second, I want to remind you to love yourself. Dwelling on the negative, the wrong, the failures will keep you exactly where you are, stuck in the worst moments that you will ever have to live through. Our admonition tells us to love one another, but one thing that I've learned from my journey is that you have to use that love and extend it to yourself. I'm not talking about vanity. I'm talking about love that loves you too. The person you are, the character you have, and the gifts and talents you share with those around you. It gives grace to your shortcomings and knows the potential you have. I see the shortcomings and the hardships, the struggles, and the many waypoints each of you have found in your lives in every one of you here tonight. And I love you not in spite of those things, but because of them. And I encourage you to do the same. And instead, use that voice in your head not to tell yourself down. Use it to tell yourself, I love you. And finally, what happens next is up to us. What I had experienced as a deficit actually became one of my greatest assets and one of the best parts of my life. At the University of Kentucky, I was able to orient myself and get my bearings, adjust to college life, and do a lot of self-reflection on who I wanted to be and how I wanted to become that person. Even if we don't know how far that path will take us or what that vision will be, trust yourself to take that next step after failure. Trust yourself to become who you were meant to be. That path you were on before may have taken you up. That path you were on before may have taken you far. But now, as we take a new step in this new direction, we can see a vision take shape that we couldn't have imagined before. What we first thought of as failure is just an earlier stop to find the next right thing. Every setback, just a waypoint for us to see how far we've come, all the right decisions that we have made. It's all a part of the journey we're on to seek new heights. And that's something that I'm still doing here on this stage tonight, understanding and becoming more of John Andrew. If you hear nothing else tonight, hear this. Order of the arrow. Trust yourself. Extend the admonition to include yourself. Every bump on the road, every switchback, every challenge we face is merely an opportunity for us to understand more of ourselves. What we first defined as failure is just the first thing that happens before we take our next first step.